Okay. So I wanted to welcome Joanna Penn to this podcast. She's the author of Audio for Authors, audiobooks, podcasting, and voice technologies. And I wanted to interview her because I've gotten a great interest on my own for these topics. And she's also the author of How to Write Nonfiction, How to Make a Living with Your Writing, Successful Self-Publishing and Public Speaking for Authors, Creatives, and Introverts, which again, I may have to have her on again sometime to talk about that because there are a lot of authors who are introverts. So anyway, and today we want to focus on how to use audio both to market your books as well as to create additional product or services that you might want to offer the people that read your books. So welcome, Joanna.
Oh, thanks for having me, John. And I first listened to you like years and years ago, like 15 years ago. I listened to your audios. Back then, we didn't have podcasts. We just had downloadable audio, right? So that's how I first heard of you. I used to listen on the way to work. And so, yeah, what goes around comes around.
Yes, I used to do a lot of Audible webinars, and that was the best way to do it at the time. Even though I'm sure back then I was trying to do video as well, but video is even harder. Now both are easier.
Oh, for sure.
So why would an author want to focus? I'm going to throw you a left-wing sidebar or something like that. Why would an author even want to get involved in audio at all?
Well, I think one of the main reasons is because it's a whole separate market. So when I think about my household, as me and my husband, I haven't read blogs for years. I listen to podcasts and I listen to audiobooks and I read books. I don't even watch videos. I'm not a video person. My husband watches YouTube and he listens to podcasts and he reads and listens to books. So even just in our household, and we're in the UK, we get our information from podcasting and we also get our entertainment from podcasting. So if you want to reach us, then and we're just
why would I want to meet you guys?
Well, we're just a small proportion of the world, right? So what we found with audio is that year on year, audiobook sales have been like double-digit growth for the last 8 years now. It is one of these, and podcasting is one of the ways to reach people while they're doing other things. So it has kind of like when you're reading a blog post, you still have to look at it. Whereas with podcasting, you can be in someone's ear. It's a personal form of marketing. It can be free. Like there are so many reasons why you would consider audiobooks and also podcasting and audio in general. It's a way to reach people. It's a way to express yourself. And I found it a very effective way to sell books and make money through other income streams.
Well, I was happy to see that you had an audio of your Audio for Authors book.
Of course, self-narrated as well.
Yeah, but I suspect that most people would actually rather read your book because they're going to want to take notes.
Oh, well, this is an interesting point, John, and another thing that's very important. People who listen to audiobooks buy other formats. So, for example, Atomic Habits by James Clear, I'm listening to at the moment on audiobook. I also own in hardback and on Kindle, because exactly what you're saying, I like to listen to it when I'm walking. I like to highlight it on my Kindle, and I like to underline things in hardback books and keep it on my shelf. So this is what I found with my nonfiction in particular. People will buy multiple formats. So if you sell more audio, you actually sell more print, which is crazy.
Yeah, I get that. My wife, she has glaucoma, and so she can't read much. So she loves listening to audiobooks, and she listens probably 3 or 4 hours a day to audio while she's doing things in the kitchen and stuff like that. So that, she really consumes the content. Her favorite series was the Outlander series.
Oh, yes.
By
Wonderful.
Diana Gabaldon. And I brought home the first set, the Outlander novel, the original, in audio from the library, and suddenly I was, because the library didn't have the whole series, I had to spend some money.
Yeah, well, that's actually another tip for people. I mean, you know this, obviously, in terms of marketing, having a series is a really good idea. And the same principle applies for audiobooks. If you have more than one, especially done with the same narrator, then that
Right.
makes a huge difference. Because if people like the voice of the narrator, they'll look for other things. If they like the voice, in inverted commas, of the author, they'll look for other things. So it is definitely, a series is very powerful.
Well, the unfortunate thing is then she wanted to buy books as gifts to introduce her to her sister and her best friend and a number of other people. So it became a costly little freebie that I got from the library. But, that's what happens. Part of it is, what criteria should authors use to decide whether or not to publish their book as an audio? I mean, should they do all books, or is there some things that, like my 1001 Ways to Market Your Books,
Yeah.
700 pages.
I would
I've
say
never
that's a
done the
no-no.
audio for.
It's a no-no, John. There's a couple of reasons why I wouldn't do your book there. One, it's very long. It'd be very expensive to do, but also you update it fairly regularly, and
Right.
that is another reason. So if you're going to update a book, like Facebook Marketing 101 is something that I wouldn't do in audio, because Facebook changes their setup like every 5 minutes. So every time you put out a book, you're like, oh, I need to do another edition. So I
Well,
do.
I think of, I wouldn't even want to write that book.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But when you think about is this or something on law or politics, although then often people want to listen because it's so boring. But in terms of whether it's worth doing, look, there's different criteria for fiction and non-fiction. So but let's talk about length, because your book is a good example of non-fiction. But let's face it, most non-fiction books are not the length of your book. So
Right.
a non-fiction book, say around 40 to 50,000 words, which is what my audio for authors is. I think it's about 55,000 words. Absolutely brilliant in audio, because people who want that book, so they'll pay a premium for that book. But something like 100,000 or 150,000 word fantasy novel, if you're going to pay for production yourself, that's very, very expensive, and the money you get in return is probably just a credit on or a subscription program. So it's expensive to produce, and you might not make your money back that fast. So
Right.
what I would do in these situations is try and license your audio. So obviously the different ways to do things, but you could license it to a company, and then they will take the production costs and also a percentage of the income. You can do it, manage it yourself. We can talk about the companies in a minute, with a professional, or you can narrate it yourself and distribute. So I do lots of different things. But in terms of non-fiction, fiction, and length, those are some kind of scales. Then I would also say, are you already selling a lot of books? Because a brand new author with a brand new self-published book and no budget, I would say, don't do it. It's not worth spending the money on that. Better to spend that money on other forms of marketing, for example, discounting and ads and that kind of thing. So
Right.
that would be another thing. And also, do you have a way to market them? So again, we know this. I mean, whatever format your book is in, people are like, well, why aren't I selling any? Well, it's probably harder to sell audiobooks if you don't have a marketing plan in general for all your other formats. And also if you haven't got some specific marketing ideas for audio in particular. So those are some things. I will say from my personal perspective, I have fiction and non-fiction. I make far more money from non-fiction audio, both selling direct and also on the various platforms. And that's because people want to spend more money on non-fiction. They'll buy direct from me, and I have a podcast where I can market really easily, whereas my fiction is less easy to market and it's less profitable.
Yeah. I can see that, and it's one reason I didn't do the 1001 Ways yet. But I have thought about breaking it up into some of
That's
the
the answer.
chapters.
Yeah.
There's 80 or 100-page chapters in the book, and I thought, well, I should probably do those as audio.
Yes, that's exactly what I would have advised someone. It's just, the thing is, the way the Amazon page works now, you don't, obviously there are lots of other sites other than Amazon, but the way that Amazon works is that obviously it links the audiobook to the actual book. So if you do chapters, they're going to appear separately, which is also fine. And people will find them differently on different markets. So I think this is good to consider. You can do audio only products. You have to do them through findawayvoices.com, because if you go through acx.com, they require you to link it to an ASIN, an Amazon number.
Okay. But I could theoretically break up the chapters into smaller, break up the book into smaller books, and then link that to the audio.
Yeah, absolutely. But then you'd almost be starting again with your project, which, your 1001 ways, that's what it's been for how many years, like 20 years or something. So now it would be 100 ideas, 10 times 100 ideas plus an extra one. It's not quite so catchy.
Yeah, so it gets a little complicated, but I think I could do it if I ever get around to it. The thing that I find is, how easy is it to create an audio for a book, say from a beginning, from a beginning author who doesn't know anything about it at all?
Right. Well, if you don't need to know anything. I mean, if you if you definitely want to do an audiobook, but you want someone else to narrate it and distribute it, you just go on to findawayvoices.com, which I prefer, which is the wide way of publishing. And it means your audiobooks will be in libraries, and then they're also owned by Spotify now. So that has a lot of potential for 2022. But essentially you log on, you create an account, and then you find a narrator, you upload your book and you pay, and you get an audiobook, and then it's distributed automatically and they send you money at the end of the month. So it's really
I like that part.
Exactly. You do, but this is the money. Remember, you have to pay up front for the audio, and then you get money back as it sells, like any other book. So that's a sort of self-publishing way. Another way is obviously to license, where you get money up front, someone else has it. The next way, of course, is that you can narrate it yourself, and then you have made those files as the narrator, and then you edit them and upload them on the same platform on Findaway. So it's cheaper once you're good at it, but there is a bit of a learning curve. So I decided about a decade ago now that I wanted to narrate my own audiobooks for non-fiction only, because I have a voice brand, because I have a podcast, and I also wanted to, at the time I didn't have much money, so I thought, well, I'll just do it myself, as I always do. I'm very independent, and since then I've got much better at it. I have some sound blankets here in the corner, and I record here. I can edit my own and master my own audiobook. So my process now is very slick. And so essentially I invested some time in learning how to do this and learned some audio. So if you want to do it yourself and you have a number of books, then it's definitely something you can do. But maybe we'll come on later to the AI stuff that I'm interested in the future, voice licensing for AI and that kind of thing. So things are changing, the costs are changing, but in terms of, is it easy? It's kind of like you have to pick what you want to spend your time on. So the easiest way is obviously to just hire a narrator and pay them to do it, and then the product is done. But so it depends.
Let's say that you have a 200-page book, and then you hire findaway.com.
Findawayvoices.com.
It is Findaway Voices. Okay. About how much would it cost to do something like that, say for a 200-page book?
Okay, so you can't think in pages when it comes to digital.
Oh, come on.
What you have to do is think in words, in word count. So see, I don't even think in I don't even know how many words that is. So let's just go with, I'll tell you what they price in. They price in per finished hour, and a finished hour is about 9,000 words.
Okay.
So that and the price per finished hour might be somewhere between $200 and $450 US per finished hour.
So that would add up.
Exactly. So you've got that 100,000 word fantasy novel. That's going to cost you like 10 grand. and how long will it take you to get that money back? Whereas for me, for example, Successful Self-Publishing, which is it's free as an ebook, and then I narrated the audiobook, it's only about an hour and a half. And I did it myself and uploaded it, and I just get money for that. And so that's all the different matrices of, is it worth learning? How many books do you have? That's another thing. Like for me, I've got like 14 non-fiction books, so it's worth it.
And you have a lot of fiction too.
Yes, but fiction requires not different accents, but different, at least distinguishing between characters and all of that. So fiction is a very different beast. I pay professionals for my fiction, except my short stories. I do my own short stories.
Okay.
Which I quite like. Yeah, I'm not intending to do fiction. That's definitely a thing.
I could see doing that for audio, for a poetry book.
Yeah, poetry's a good one.
I have a small poetry book that it would be kind of fun to narrate it and put it out there. Yeah. I've done some individual poems and then read them, because I have one podcast that I do called Tell Me a Story podcast, and where I tell stories, because my wife has written a lot of short stories, and then I did some of my poems that way as well in that podcast. And I did a couple of short stories just recently there as well. It's sporadic, so I'm breaking one of the prime rules of podcast, which is do it on a regular basis.
It has to be a habit. But in terms of the audio quality between podcasting and audiobook narration, there are rules and levels you have to apply. So once you understand it, then it's not that big a deal, but there is a difference in quality in terms of sound. So but I mean, that's too technical to go into right now. Obviously there's stuff in the book and things, but there is a floor and a ceiling for where your sound needs to be, which is different to podcasting. That I think that's important to note. You can't just take your podcast and upload it onto Find a Way. So your short story that you've narrated, you would have to do it again within an environment that gave it the right sound.
I get it. With a British accent, of course.
No, your accent is fine. Because the nice thing is there that it's your story or your poem, and this is the thing about audio, it connects us very personally to the narrator, which is why the narrator is so important. And if you get the narrator wrong, like my husband with his fantasy, like he only listens to fantasy books, and he's like, this narrator was so wrong, I'm not listening to any more of that series, it's terrible, that person pronounced things wrong. I mean, I was like, whoa, chill out. But people really care about their narrators.
Well, I've noticed that with narrators. There's some women that read books, and they make the men all sound slow and dumb. I
just won't comment on that, John.
Men do it the other way. They make women sound light and flighty, and oh my gosh,
Help me.
But there's some that are incredible. Like for the Outlander series, the narrator there, she is incredible.
Yes, she's probably a professional actress, but this is where. Okay, just from an audio perspective, there are also different kinds of listeners. There are different kinds of readers, just like there are in fiction. Like some fiction readers will only read literary fiction that's won an award. Some people want a romance a day. Some people like me, I want thrillers, I want escape. So you have to think some listeners, like for me, I will listen to a really professional audio with amazing actresses or a full cast drama. Like I will listen to that, but mostly I listen to about 80% non-fiction books on 1.5 speed. So I listen at a faster speed. So the whole performance of the artist and their breathing, it doesn't matter because I'm listening at 1.5 speed. You can even get rid of the pauses. So you can because the brain can take things in much faster than people speak. Right. So I think this is interesting. Don't assume that your listener is not out there, if you see what I mean. Like people want audio. So give it a go. I don't want to put people off. Like you don't need to be a professional actor or actress to narrate an audiobook. I'm not.
Yes, and you can certainly start that way, and then if you find out that it sells well, then you can always upgrade your audio.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. One of the questions I had was, how does an author price an audiobook, versus a paperback, hardcover, or Kindle ebook?
Well, the main thing is Audible, you don't get to set your price, they set your price. So it's really cheeky, but essentially they set their price, they do the discounting, which is why it's so brilliant that they are not the only game in town. So that's why I recommend findawayvoices.com, because they distribute to 43 different retailers, including things like libraries, where actually you get paid per checkout, which is a micro payment per checkout.
Right.
Or Scribd, for example, you get a micro payment per borrow. There are different models, credit model, the purchase model, but if you distribute through Findaway, you do get to set a price for sale and for a library and for a promotion. Okay. So, and this is where you need to look at your genre and price basically according to genre and according to length. But again, the problem with length is 150,000 word fantasy novel, you still can't price very high, whereas a 50,000 word nonfiction book, you can price higher because nonfiction listeners pay more. So I sell my audio direct as well through payhip.com, and I normally price it probably around the same as the paperback. So I think that audio for authors is about $12.99 US or $14.99 US for the audiobook, and like half that for the ebook, I think. Right. Approximately that.
It seemed like it was about equivalent in that particular one to your paperback. I think it's $1 less than your paperback.
And then with Findaway, you can do
Amazon.
Price promotions. Yeah, on Amazon. Yeah, and that's Audible, so they just do what the hell they like. And you just get whatever's left. But yes, you can do promotional pricing if you publish through Findaway. So Chirp Books is really, really good for audio deals, and that is a way to really sell a lot of audio.
And a Chirp book is?
Chirp Books is a website. Do you know BookBub? You must know bookbub.com, which is the ebook promotion site. They also own Chirp Books, and that is a audio promotion site. So for example, I've got a deal coming up next month where I'll drop the first in series. This is for fiction. I'll drop it to 99 cents for the audiobook. And in fact, I'll drop my whole series right down, and they promote it and it goes out to their email list. It's one of those sites, but for audio. Now you can only do that if you publish through Findaway Voices, not just Audible.
Oops, sorry there. Forgot to disconnect my phone. So there was a question that I wanted to ask you, but it's gone. The way of the dodo bird. So okay, let's see what else. I think I'd like to then now move on to podcasting, because I'm doing a course on podcasting, so I want to really have people understand that. It was one of the things that I really got interested in. And
there was just one more thing I wanted to add on audio, because you'd written this down and I wrote it down, which is in terms of promoting all the additions to your books, I recommend people use a site called books2read.com. So books, the number 2 read.com, and you can add in links to your ebook, your paperback, hardback, large print, and audiobook links. So it's one link and it's all free, one link, and then people click on it and they can choose their formats, because one of the key things with all this marketing is you've got to give people the choice of where to buy. So this books2read.com enables you to use one link on your social media or email or business card, whatever, and that then people have a choice, and that includes audiobooks. So I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, that's great. So is it easy to start a podcast?
I love this question because on the one hand you could say, yeah, of course, you just go onto a site like Anchor, or like there's hundreds of them now. You just press a button that says start podcast and you have a podcast, and ta-da. But of course that it's the same to publish a Kindle book almost, you just upload a Word document and use a free cover and there you go. But in exactly the same way, that is not the answer. so I think that the main thing is, yes, it's easy to technically start a podcast, but what you actually need to do is think before you start one. Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm just I get distracted by the phone and the answering machine, and so I apologize for that.
That's all right. So I'll carry on. So yes, so spend some time thinking first. So what niche are you going into? And not just that, what angle in that niche are you going into? So my podcast, The Creative Pen, is in the publishing and the creator niche, but it's particularly for independently minded authors. Then who are the target audience? What is your monetization strategy? Because look, you can start a podcast, but if it's still going 3 years later and you haven't made any money in some form, you will probably give it up because costs do appear. What is your content strategy? So what type of show are you going to do? How are you going to brand it? What's your imaging going to be? What is the name going to be? Because this is a huge deal because of SEO and that type of thing. And also, are you ready to commit for the long term? And are you ready to put yourself out there in the world in this way? Because sure, no one might find you. You might be speaking to nothing, or you might suddenly have an audience, or over the years build an audience. And then you're responsible for the words that you say in the world, in public. So are you ready for that kind of exposure? And what is your angle is the main thing. So if you can answer all those questions, then yes, it's easy to start a podcast.
I think I read somewhere that like 80% of the podcasts on Apple iTunes are no longer active.
Yes.
It's some big number that a lot of people, they started up, they go, wow, this is fun. They do 3 episodes and they quit.
Well, and this is why I actually have a rule. I get pitched to go on podcasts all the time, and I say, please only pitch me when you have 30 shows live, because if someone gets to 30 live shows, then usually they're going to at least stick around for a bit. But I'm on episode 600 of my podcast, and I know that it takes time to build an audience. But equally, I think it's like in the when everyone had a blog, I started like 4 different blogs, and I was like, actually that's not the right angle. So I think it's completely natural to let things go. But if you want a successful podcast, then you have to think about these things. The other thing is, I want to encourage people, because one of the problems is that so many podcasts are by certain people. So for example, in the tech niche, there's a lot of middle-aged men in their late 30s, early 40s, like tech bros, Americans. But there might not be so many Mexican female tech entrepreneur podcasters. So I think this is the way to think. I mean, like me as a British woman in the publishing space, there are now more women, but when I started, there were very few women podcasting in general. So when you're looking at your niche, have a look at the other podcasts and kind of see, well, I like what they're doing, but I'm different in this way. And I like what they're doing, but I'm different in this way, and find where you fit. Otherwise, like you say, you'll be like, okay, well, that's a bit tough.
Yeah, you do have to figure out a way to stand out. One of the quandaries I have sometimes is, helping think about it, what kind of podcasts an author should do. Now, I think in fiction, sometimes you could just do one where you read parts of your book, sort of like Andy Weir did with The Martian, and he did it very successfui.
Yeah, but he's an outlier.
For a lot of people, I think people like to listen to interviews. I found that to be the case. But at the same time, there are things I'd like to do with my podcast where I'll just talk myself. And but then are you sending two different messages if you're using different formats? I think your podcast is all interviews.
No, I do. Well, I do a couple of things. So one is I always do an introductory segment, which is usually about 20 minutes, which a lot of my listeners just come for the introductory segment, which is what's happening in the news, and then in the publishing and book marketing news, and then how's my author career going, because I stay accountable to my audience, and then interactions with my patrons and with comments and tweets and things like that. So there's always an introductory segment, and then I also do solo shows. So for example, my episode 600, which is next weekend as we're recording this, that will be a solo show, and I'm just going to answer questions from the community, and then I'll do solo stuff in between. But you're right, most of my episodes, the main content is an interview, and one of the reasons is because it's much easier. Like, you and I are creating an hour's probably worth of content, and we've both done some preparation, but essentially it's much quicker for us both to have a conversation. That if you were trying to prepare this yourself, you would have to do a lot more work. So basically it's and also there's networking. You and I, you came on my podcast, and that's coming out soon, and I'm coming on yours. We're having a networking chat, we're renewing a relationship, that kind of thing. So I would also caution, I was thinking about that, I would caution people on doing co-hosting, because every co-hosted, I was trying to think, like, pretty much every co-hosted podcast I've been across in the last 13 years of podcasting, they're all gone, because the relationships between the co-hosts change as relationships do, and then who owns the podcast then, and often those people go on and start another podcast somewhere else or whatever, and they stay in the community, but that show has disappeared, and then the feed has stopped, and also the intellectual property, we are creating a piece of intellectual property together. It just becomes difficult. Then who owns the email list the call to action, who owns their website? So that would be one caution, is it can seem easier to just have a co-host, but in my experience, if you want to do it long term, then doing something yourself is probably better, or at least getting clear on who owns it.
Yeah, I'm surprised by some of the authors who are co-authors of a fiction series, Preston and Child, I think of. And I think, wow, marriages don't last that long. So
they do keep getting big book contracts, though. I like their books. I like the Pendergast series.
Yeah. But it's a challenge to keep, something like that going over time. I know that both of the authors do their own books as well. Yes. So, it probably works well. It's probably fun in some ways to co-author a book or do a podcast together. But I found that a lot of times when you have two people on a podcast, they just talk to each other. And it's sort of like, well, where's the content?
Yes, and some people want that banter, like, there is the banter type of podcast, if that's your thing. But look, you and I are both real content producers, and probably the people listening to this are more people who are more like us and want to produce content. I mean, your audience produce content. So to me, it is exactly right. It's about, here's the questions, and I do like this too. I prepare questions. I know what I want to ask, and there's might be a bit of banter, but it's mostly about the content that will serve the audience of the podcaster. And that's a really important point.
Yes. So I was thinking about that. I was wondering if, like my Tell Me a Story podcast is 1 to 5 minutes. So it's real short. So far, I haven't really monetized it, but I like doing it because I love sharing my wife's stories and some of the other stories that I find and so on. But probably the most effective kind of podcast is something that you do at least once a week, and you do it for at least half hour to an hour. I would presume that that's the kind that builds up an audience.
Yes, you need enough time. I mean, there have been some very successful podcasts. John Lee Dumas with Entrepreneur on Fire, one of the most successful podcasters in terms of money. But I don't listen to that show because it's the same questions for every single person. I've been on that show, but it's like, if you ask the same questions of every person, then I like the chat. I like finding out about the person I'm interviewing, and I will ask questions that are specific for that person. So yeah, I think you in terms of length, it's quite interesting because Tim Ferriss has a huge podcast. Some of his interviews are like 3 hours long. Joe Rogan obviously also 3 hours long. Personally, I like to keep things around an hour, and my introduction's like 20 minutes. But yeah, the length, you're right, you have to have engagement. And one of the other things is that people connect with the host of the podcast because they're the voice they hear most. So I would always advise to inject your own personality and your own life into the show, because that's the way you're going to stand out, is by being you and connecting with people. But just come back on your story podcast. So there's an example similar to writing books. Sometimes you just write a book or do a podcast because it's creative and fun. It doesn't have to have anything. You could just stop that tomorrow. It's not going to affect your business. It's just fun, right? Whereas I have the Books and Travel podcast, which is kind of like that. It's like, I just love talking to people about travel. But my Creative Pen podcast has grown from a hobby into a huge part of my business. I get paid, advertising fees. I have a Patreon. I obviously market my books. I use affiliate links. I advertise webinars and things like that. So but that monetization strategy emerged over time. So again, you could in the future decide to monetize your story thing, maybe with fiction, or actually sell those books, as I'm planning to do with my Books and Travel podcast. So you don't have to do it right from the beginning, but I do think that at some point you have to have a reason to carry on podcasting. And if it's not fun or you're not making any money, or you're not marketing any product or book or service or whatever, then you'll probably stop.
Unless it's just fun and you like it.
Yeah, if it's fun, then but it has to fulfill something in your life. Like any form of marketing, if it's the grind, if you're like, oh my goodness, I just don't want to do this. Voice is incredibly revealing. People will know. You have to come to the microphone with emotion. It is a performance. I'm an introvert. I don't talk that much, but when I come on a podcast, I put my makeup on, I've done my hair, I'm doing my Joanna Penn podcasting thing. I'm bringing the energy to you and your listeners, because this is the way to communicate meaning and feeling. So yeah, if you hate it, people are going to realize, and people just won't listen.
Yes, and tell me a story. It only takes me like 5 minutes to do an episode, because I'm basically just typing in the story and then reading it, hopefully with enough passion or something to make it interesting. But so it's not that complicated. Something like this, you have to figure out, okay, what do I want to learn from the guest? So then you invent, the questions based on that. And so you have to do a little bit of pre-work.
Exactly. But that's what makes it worthwhile, both to you and me, because we learn something. I only interview people who I'm actually interested in. Like I'll never just, in fact, I will say no to pitches from like people who are just, they might be famous or they're really important in some way, but they have nothing to teach my audience. I'm far more likely to take a pitch from someone who's maybe got one book, but it's on a topic that I think is just brilliant. So, we're serving our audience as podcasters, right. And we do that by giving a good interview and bringing good guests, and then editing necessarily sometimes to get rid of stuff that is just extraneous. And I was going to mention this. There's a really great tool called Descript.com, and you can it's just amazing. This saves so much time. You can put in an audio file and it generates a transcript, and then you can edit with the words. So we could see whatever the filler words are, and you can remove those, and that cuts some time. But also, I had someone on for one topic and they went off about something I was not going to put on my show. So I just cut that bit out completely. I was like, nope, not happening. Or sometimes like I have a clean show and sometimes someone will swear and I'll obviously have to edit that, but I can do it all with words as opposed to the waveform, the audio editing. So I really love that. That's Descript.com.
Okay, that's great. That's great advice. It's nice that you've mentioned a number of different tools, and I think Find a Way Voices is going to be really big now that Substack owns it.
Spotify. Spotify. Spotify.
Oh, Spotify. I mean, you're right. There we go. Spotify, because Spotify is really wanting to get into audio much more, spoken word. And so they're getting big into podcasting, but they're also starting to create their own exclusive audiobooks.
Yeah, they are the rival to Audible. And I mean, I switched like 18 months ago, whatever, I switched pretty much all my audio over to Spotify. And once they get audiobooks, I will probably move my subscription over like completely. I mean, I'm already a subscriber. So I think, and I get all my podcasts on Spotify and I use it like a search engine. So if I want to know a topic, I'll type the topic into the podcasting search engine and it will come up with episodes, and I'll just dip in and out of different shows. Like I only listen to some shows every week, but mostly I'm dipping in and out on topics that I'm interested in. So people's behavior has changed with audio over time. But yeah, Spotify have the killer algorithm, like killer discoverability. So I know some people think, oh, but they pay a little bit of money. Well, so do a lot of places. Our job with all our work, our job is to be where people are and bring them back to our hub, which is our website, our email list, and sell. Hopefully they will pay more money for other products over time. So I see being on Spotify as an audio creator to be absolutely critical.
But Find a Way Voices also syndicates to Audible, right?
Yes, you can publish through Find a Way, to Audible, Apple Books, Google Books, Kobo, everywhere pretty much. And I mean, at the moment, as we record this, they don't send to Spotify. But how much longer will it take? They bought them in, I think, November or December 2021. So only a few months ago, as we speak. Right. So by the end of 2022, I would expect to see it happening.
They're making a lot of money through the ads that they run against the podcast and so on. So I know that that's one of the reasons they want to get more into the spoken word audio. But
they're also, I'm a subscriber and I don't hear any ads. I pay per month and I don't get ads. So they make money from subscription from people like me, and then ads from people who don't pay.
Well, they get almost $1 trillion in ads now.
Yeah, I mean,
from podcasting and so on. So it's significant enough that they're really expanding into it.
Oh, absolutely.
Which I think is great. And then of course they have their subscribers just like Audible does. And my wife and I belong to Audible, and we listen a lot there, both their freebies, which I presume they pay their authors somehow on the freebies. But then, we also, get the credits that we buy books for. But then it's still hard to find some books. There's one that my wife wants right now called Teata, I think it is. It's about an Indian storyteller, American Indian. And she just wants it's apparently a Netflix movie. But movies are even hard for her to consume because of her eyes right now. So she's looking for an audio version of it, and we don't find one yet. So, those things still happen. I mean, Audible certainly doesn't have every book, and Spotify.
Most books are not in audio.
Right.
So that's why it's still a growth market. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Spotify's the same way. I think they probably cover almost all music. But they probably have some people that are holding out their music from them.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and just like some people holding back from Apple. But then there's still the whole audiobook thing. And I really think that it's the audiobook and podcasting, I think is a real, still, I think a good territory for authors to get into. And that's why I wanted to speak to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How does an author find the best podcast to pitch as a guest?
Well, the main thing, I mean, you can just go on Google and say best book marketing podcasts and see what comes up and then listen to them. But essentially, you need to know your niche and then go looking, whether that's on Spotify or Apple or Google Podcasts or just Google. There'll be loads of lists for that kind of thing. And then you need to listen to some because the worst pitches are the ones where clearly they haven't listened to the show and they're like, hey, I want to talk about credit cards on your podcast. It's like, what? Don't be ridiculous. Delete. So you have to find a sort of a list, find a long list, maybe like 20 that and they don't just have to be about your niche of your book. They can also be other things that you're interested in. For example, I'm a female entrepreneur or a female in tech. I could go on a female tech podcast. I could also go on a fiction writing podcast. I've been on a Jungian psychology podcast because that was a topic that in my first novel. I go on different creator podcasts. So you can pitch for your personality, or maybe you feature dogs in your book or something, then you could try a dog. So think in these different segments of your life and the book and what the books are, and then have a listen. And then do you resonate with that show? So for example, in America, you have some interesting political sides of the spectrum. Are you going to really hate talking to this show host, for example? Like, you have to find some common ground. So what I'll do is, okay, I can see, oh, look, John Kramer has a book on marketing. So I will make, we have something in common. So that could be something I bring up. So I will make sort of notes on people that I think, I would talk to them. And then, you need to then, so you need to know the podcast, you need to have a look at the host, and then you need to think about the audience. Is this audience a good fit for you? So for example, I've gone on shows where they have asked me, I've thought it was a good fit, but then they've asked me things like, how do you get an agent? And I'm like, well, I don't have an agent. And that's not what I do. I'm an independent creator and I license my own work. And they're like, oh, okay then, so that there hasn't been a good fit, even if you think it's the right niche, and then it's not. So that's what you have to do, is to pitch, and it's much better to only pitch 5 podcasts that match really well. You're far more likely to get a good hit rate than, I know there's all these pitching companies now, like you pay a pitching company and they'll be like, yeah, we'll pitch 100 podcasts for you. I mean, we know it's like doing a press release. It's like spam. Whereas individual targeting, and I would much rather hear from the author directly than some PR person. Pitch me with a good idea that my audience want, and demonstrate that you've actually paid some attention to what I do and what my audience want. And I am far more likely to say yes. So I think that covers it.
I think it does. But, there's also the aspect of how to be a good guest once you do find one. And one of the things I think makes for a good guest is somebody that actually promotes the podcast that features them.
Oh, see, I don't think that at all.
You don't?
No, it's not even on my list. The most important thing to me is, it's my job to look after my audience. So if you come on my show, which you have, then I expect you to give good information or information, inspiration. All I expect of my guest is to give everything. And that's my biggest tip is, do not hold back. Like, give as much as you give, as much value as you can in the amount of time. Give away everything, answer all the questions in a way that helps the audience. And if you do that, you're a brilliant guest. Everything else will be forgiven. Like, yes, it would be ideal if you had some good sound equipment, but it's much better to give a good interview in that way that I've talked about. Like, so you see who is the audience. So I know, I mean, we know each other, so I know the audience here. But if I was going on a new podcast, I'd be like, okay, so who is the target market? What examples can I use? Oh, I was on a show earlier where their tagline was like freedom and liberty. And I was like, okay, that's cool. I'm an independent creator. So I emphasized the freedom aspect more than perhaps I would on other shows, and went with that angle and that will hopefully will provide value to that audience. So yes, do your research. Also conversation. I mean, I obviously have prepared some notes here, but I'm not reading from my notes. I've got my notes to remind me of things I want to say that are useful, but I'm also, you and I are interacting. It's going back and forwards. If I feel like I've said too much, I'll stop and let you have a go. But the worst interview I ever had was a monosyllabic author. I'd be like asking a question and he would go, yes. And I was like, this is so much hard work, like having to have to like pull something out of someone, make it easy on the host. So that's from my angle. The promoting it, I'm less worried about that at all. Like, really, I see that as my job, and I look after my audience. If they send people over, all well and good, but I look after my audience.
I just think it's a courtesy to promote the podcast you're on.
I better promote this one then, John.
Well, absolutely. But, for me, I think it's sort of like a courtesy thing to do it. I understand that there are some people, you want them on because of the content they offer, not because they're going to promote you.
Yeah, they might not even have an audience, but they might have something really valuable to say.
Excuse me. And that's, a real key part of it, because what you want best is a good podcast episode. You want good content. You want something that people will share. And that's more important than anything else. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. I also want SEO content. So I specifically look for content where I know that SEO, search engine optimization, will be good. So I see this as a long tail process. So sure, someone might send out a tweet or an email after they've been on my show, but I get traffic on episodes like for over a decade since I started podcasting. So it's more important to me. So I know, for example, that a show on editing fiction in particular will do really well. So I make sure that, okay, I put in fiction editors for, to make sure that topic is coming up, because I know, and I don't expect them to promote it at all. I'm doing it for my business and my audience. So I get what you mean, but I would never expect that.
I get what you mean as well, because, for example, if I were to interview a bookstore owner, I know they're not going to promote it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm hoping to get some good content out of them that will be useful for the authors and so on. Or the same with editors. You wouldn't expect them to promote. But if I'm talking to an internet marketer, I'm hoping they'll promote.
Yeah, hoping is fine. But I've had some people like, oh, can you come on my podcast? But by the way, if you come on my podcast, you have to promote 3 times to your email list. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Delete.
Yes, I get that side of it too. So let's see. I'd like to talk, I know we're coming towards the end. I'd like to ask a little bit. I know that you're enthusiastic about artificial intelligence, speech to text, text to speech, that whole gamut of possibilities. And one thing I've noticed over the last 5-10 years is that text to speech is getting much better. You can actually enter a text and it actually sounds like a real person is repeating it. And that's partially, I think, an algorithm and artificial intelligence. It's not just that however they process the speech otherwise, they do something that is a lot better. It sounds like almost like a real person, almost.
Yeah, and there becomes a question, because it can sound exactly like a real person, but do we want it to? So this is actually an ethical question that's coming up about labeling of what is AI and what is not AI. But you're right, the AI voice space has just dramatically accelerated. Google has AI narrated audiobooks on the Google Play Store already. There are companies like Deep Zen, who I've used to do 2 AI narrated audiobooks, a fiction and a non-fiction, Speech Key, Scribe Audio, even Amazon Polly, which is Amazon's own voice that you can use to do things, and then Descript, which I mentioned earlier. You can create a voice double. So I've done a few shows with my voice double, which is, it sounds like me, and I can put it in the podcast. And I always say, this is not me, this is my voice double. You know, I always admit when I'm using AI. But the point is that if you listen to some of these, and I can spell these companies for you later, so you can put it in the notes or whatever, but the cost is a lot lower to do audio. I want choice of voice. So, for example, my 1,000 Fiendish Angels, which is 3 short stories, I've recorded it in a British female voice, and then I got a male American AI to read it. And it sounds obviously completely different, because I'm not an American man, and I might have been a British man, but it was a man anyway. So it was completely different. And so what I want as a listener, okay, I don't want to always have the same narrator. So I listen to a lot of business books, and they're pretty much always narrated by an American man, regardless who wrote it. So it's like, well, what if I want to listen to that in a British female voice? I should be able to just choose a different book. And that's only possible with AI. Bring down the cost. And then, of course, we talk about, well, what about accent? It's all very well having British English, American English, but what about Indian English or Nigerian English or Jamaican English? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to choose your accent? And then, of course, it's all the different languages around the world. Why can't we just easily have our books available in different languages and different speech patterns? So this is what will be enabled with AI audio, and people are quite upset about it in many ways. We talked about narrators earlier, but narrators will be able to license their voices. So I'm working on, hopefully this year, I'll be able to get my voice up as an AI voice, that if you use my voice to narrate your book, I get paid a license fee for you doing that.
Okay.
Or you could use someone famous like Stephen Fry or whatever. And then, so that's one thing. And also for narrators, I don't see it as an either or. I see it as a cheap option, AI, a premium option, a human narrator, and a really premium option, which is the full cast audio drama, sound effects, orchestra. So you've got stratification of audio rights rather than just here's the exact audiobook for this book. Like it's expanding the industry, not shrinking it. And that's why I'm so positive about it. But yeah, things are moving much faster than I thought. So, and with Spotify allows AI generated music. So it may be that Spotify will allow AI narrated audiobooks. We don't know yet, but at the moment you have to sell it direct because you can't distribute it otherwise. But yeah, I find it fascinating.
I think I might be interested if I redid this particular podcast with a Jamaican man voice.
Yeah, it'd be awesome. Yeah, completely. But what it does mean, so for example, with your 1001 ways to market a book, that would be so much cheaper to do with an AI voice. And also the production is so easy. And what's amazing is if something's pronounced wrong, you just retype it and it regenerates the whole thing, which is brilliant with fiction. Like if someone's pronounced a name wrong, like all the way through or whatever, it's really easy to fix. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this and a lot more tools, in the same way like we have Vellum for formatting books. We'll get tools where we can format with AI voices, and then you'll get some amazingly creative things where different AI voices will work together, and you could do a full cast AI audio. I just think there's so much potential ahead, so I hope people are excited about that.
Have you created any Spanish versions of your fiction books, let's say?
I have done some Spanish, I've done German, but the
Not
problem,
through AI?
no. With AI translation for nonfiction, AI translation is obviously a completely different discussion. But
Okay.
I haven't done any audiobooks in translation with AI, mainly because it's very hard to judge quality, and at the moment I can only judge things in English anyway. So,
Right.
but it's definitely something I would love to see more of.
I think it could be interesting to see, especially with self-publishers and so on, doing the Spanish audio, because they may not have a opportunity to be visible enough for, some company in Spain to come and say, we'd like to do the audio of your book and publish the print version.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is so much potential. I mean, we're both enthusiastic about the industry, but I feel like with audio, we're like Jeff Bezos says, it's day one. Like, it's day one for audio. You have not missed it, listeners. Like, if you're thinking, oh, maybe I'm too late. No, you are not too late. It is barely beginning. Like, really, this is all very exciting.
It's interesting because podcasting's been around for 15, 20 years at least, I would think, but it's really starting to take off on another level, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's why, I'm asking people and telling people, you need to do a podcast. It's one of the most effective ways to get you and your books out there into the marketplace.
Well, I would
Because
say
people will pay attention to audio in a different way than reading something.
I do think it's a commitment. So what I would say is either start your own podcast or pitch. Put on your list, I must pitch, let's say 6 podcasts a year. I must make sure that in a year I am available in audio when I'm talking about my book. And if you need voice training or interview training, then sort that out. But this form of marketing, as you said, is not going away. And it's obviously not as much work to be a guest on a show than it is to produce your own show. So yeah, lots of ideas there.
Okay. Any last advice you'd like to leave with authors? Or certainly I'd be happy if you pitch something.
Oh, well, if you're interested in my book, Audio for Authors, then it is available in audiobook as well as ebook and print and all the rest. But yes, you can also come over to the Creative Penn podcast, Penn with a double N, and that's every Monday.
Okay. I'm anxious to hear mine.
It's coming, John.
I know. So anything else, any little piece of advice or
just give it a go. That's my advice. Give it a go. My first interview was on a phone holding a recording device next to the phone, like back in the day when it was like, put it on speakerphone. Like, literally, that was my episode 1. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but hey, you got to start somewhere.
I got to go back and listen to that one. I presume it's still up there somewhere.
It is. It's still there, thecreativepenn.com/podcast. Like, scroll to the bottom and there it is.
Scroll through 600 episodes, and finally you get the gem.
Yeah. Well, I keep these things up for posterity, right? And my old YouTube videos from 2009, and I mean, we all know how this goes. Things take time to build, but yeah, just try. That's all we can do, and put stuff out there, and it's amazing what might happen.
I think a lot of it has to do with just really liking your audience. I think that comes through in a good podcast or in an interview where somebody's interviewing you for a podcast. That kind of enthusiasm is real important. That kind of love for your audience, I think, is important. Indeed.
Well, thank you for having me, John.
Yes, thank you very much. So everybody go to the Creative Penn podcast.com?
No, just thecreativepenn.com, or just search for The Creative Penn with a double N on your podcast app.
Double N, you got to get that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.